In 1994, 7-year-old Ashley Thompson vanished hours after winning a beauty pageant, leaving her mother, Sarah, desperate for answers. 3 years later, while cleaning the attic, Sarah discovers an old, moldy cereal bowl, something that will unlock a chilling conspiracy. What started as a mother's search for her daughter becomes a horrifying journey into a network of exploitation and secrets far darker than Sarah could have ever imagined. The ballroom was filled with claps and cheers, a sea of flashing lights and brightly colored ribbons. The small crowd at the Colorado Springs Convention Center erupted into applause as the last contestant stood on stage. The evening had been flawless. Every detail of the child beauty pageant had gone according to plan. The contestants, all young girls between 6 and 10, had dazzled the judges with their smiles, poise, and sparkling gowns. Their parents beamed with pride, their hearts full of the joy that only comes when watching their child achieve something so remarkable. But for one family, the night would end in darkness. As the winner was announced, the little girl took her moment of glory. Her name echoed through the microphone: Ashley Thompson. At just 7 years old, Ashley had already taken home multiple trophies, but tonight was her crowning achievement. Her mother, Sarah, was the first to stand and clap, her heart swelling with pride. She had watched her daughter work tirelessly for months, preparing for this very moment. The soft glow of the spotlight cast a warm halo around Ashley's bright face, her blonde curls bouncing as she curtsied to the cheering crowd. Sarah smiled, watching her daughter on stage, feeling the exhaustion of the past few months wash away. They had done it. Ashley had earned the crown. The final applause was deafening, the air thick with excitement and a sense of accomplishment. As Ashley walked off the stage, her mother hurried to meet her. She embraced her tightly, pulling her daughter into her arms as if to protect her from the world. This was her moment. But as the crowd began to disperse, something felt off. Sarah's gut twisted as she watched Ashley walk to the back of the stage, her hand clutched by a pageant coordinator. The child's gaze was distant, as though something or someone had captured her attention. "Mommy," Ashley called out, her voice small but her eyes wide. "I'll be right back. I just need to go to the bathroom." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she smiled. "Hurry back, honey. We need to get your crown on and take pictures." Ashley nodded and scurried off down the narrow hallway that led behind the stage. Sarah stood there for a moment, holding her breath, watching the crowd break apart, a sudden sense of unease creeping up her spine. But this was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives. She told herself not to overthink it. Time passed. Sarah chatted with a few of the other parents, keeping one eye on the hallway. She kept waiting for her daughter to return, but the minutes stretched into an hour. Sarah's smile faded, and a faint panic stirred in her chest. "Have you seen Ashley?" she asked one of the other mothers casually. The woman shrugged, her face confused. "I thought she was with you. I saw her walk off with the coordinator. Maybe she's in the dressing room." Sarah forced a laugh, trying to mask the concern that was now clawing at her. "Right, I'll check." She moved quickly toward the backstage area, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The faint murmur of voices grew louder as she approached the dressing rooms, but there was no sign of Ashley. Sarah's throat tightened. She peered into the room, scanning the rows of costumes, the scattered props. "Ashley," she called softly, but there was no response. Sarah's heart pounded now. She stepped further into the space, her eyes darting, looking for any trace of her daughter's familiar blue dress or her golden curls. "Mom!" A voice startled her from behind, and Sarah spun around. It was one of the coordinators, a young woman who seemed slightly flustered. "Have you seen Ashley?" Sarah demanded, the fear creeping into her voice. "She's been gone for over an hour now." The coordinator's face went pale. "Ashley, she isn't with you?" "No. She went to the bathroom, and she hasn't come back. I've checked everywhere." Sarah's voice cracked, but she forced herself to stay calm. "She's missing." The coordinator's face drained of color. "Let me go get someone," she stammered, but before she could move, Sarah pushed past her and rushed to the exit. It was only then that the full weight of the night's horror began to sink in. Ashley was nowhere to be found. She had vanished without a trace, just like that. Sarah's mind raced. The night had started so perfectly. It was supposed to be their victory, their triumph. But now, with every passing minute, it was turning into an endless nightmare. The police arrived quickly, but their calm demeanor only heightened Sarah's sense of dread. The officers asked the usual questions. Was there anyone she might have been with? Had she run off on her own? Had Ashley been acting strangely, giving any signs that she wanted to leave early? Sarah answered as best as she could, each response feeling like a stab in the gut. No, she wasn't upset. She was happy. She was excited about the crown, about the pictures we were going to take. But the officers, ever so polite, continued their routine. They asked the pageant organizers to check the surveillance cameras, to search the bathrooms again. One officer even suggested, almost as if in passing, that perhaps the child had simply wandered off, too shy to return and too scared to ask for help. Sarah's stomach churned at the thought. Ashley would never do that. Not her little girl. Not after everything they'd worked for, after all the rehearsals and practice sessions. She was too excited, too proud to do something like that. Still, the investigation continued. The hours bled into one another as Sarah paced the hallways of the convention center, praying, waiting, hoping. But with each passing hour, that hope began to fade, replaced by a deepening sense of panic. Sarah's mind raced, flashing between fragmented thoughts. What if someone had taken her? What if Ashley had been too trusting? Had someone lured her away with a friendly gesture, a smile, a promise of something she wanted? It was then that a thought hit her like a cold wave. The coordinator. Sarah hadn't seen the woman since Ashley went missing, and she hadn't heard anyone mention her name since the initial panic. The young woman had been one of the first to find her, yet no one seemed to know where she had gone after that. She wasn't in the backstage area when Sarah checked. Suddenly, the question that had been nagging at her for hours became clear. Had someone planned this? Had someone been waiting for this very moment to take her daughter? I need to speak to the coordinator, Sarah demanded, her voice shaking as she addressed one of the officers. The officer, his face unreadable, nodded slowly. We'll find her, ma'am. But right now, the priority is getting the security footage. We have to follow protocol. But Sarah couldn't let it go. Something felt wrong, something she couldn't yet put into words. Every corner of the convention center seemed to carry a sense of unease now. Every hallway and every room hiding something, hiding someone. Minutes felt like hours as the officers scanned the footage. Sarah's breath caught in her throat when the footage from the security cameras finally appeared on the screen in front of her. The video showed Ashley walking toward the bathrooms, as she'd said. But then, the footage flickered. The camera feed suddenly jumped, and Ashley was gone. There was no sign of her leaving the building. No other exit. No one followed her out. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. But Sarah's blood ran cold when the video flickered again. A shadow, dark and fleeting, moved across the hallway behind Ashley. Just for a moment, the shadow was barely visible. But in that brief moment, Sarah knew something was wrong. It was almost too fast to see, too quick for anyone to have noticed. That shadow had been too close to Ashley. Without a word, Sarah turned to the officer, her face now pale with fear. What is that? Who is that? The officer stared at the screen, his face tightening as he leaned in closer. It's hard to tell. It could be anyone. It could be someone from the pageant, Sarah urged, her voice breaking with desperation. Someone who had access to the backstage. Someone who knew the layout. This wasn't random. The officer didn't respond, but his gaze lingered on the flickering shadows on the screen. There was something more in his eyes now, something Sarah hadn't seen before. Recognition? Unease? He turned to one of his colleagues and muttered under his breath, "Run the footage back. Let's see if we can get a clearer image." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she waited. Minutes passed, but with each second, the absence of her daughter, the hollow space where her presence should have been, grew heavier. The festive music from the pageant had long since faded, replaced by the buzzing hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Finally, the officer looked up from the screen. "We'll need to go through the whole building. Someone might have taken her, but we can't say for sure yet. We'll continue the search, ma'am." His words hung in the air like a cold promise, but they did nothing to soothe Sarah's growing panic. She felt like she was drowning in the silence that followed. The next hours were a blur. The search expanded. The police questioned everyone who had been at the event, and Sarah sat in the corner, too numb to speak. She had already called her ex-husband, reached out to her family, and even posted on social media, but there was no word, no sign of Ashley. Then came the moment she would never forget, the moment her world shifted forever. A uniformed officer walked into the room with an envelope in hand, his expression grim. He handed it over to Sarah, who could barely breathe as she took it. Inside was a single photograph, taken from the convention center's parking lot. It was a blurry shot, but unmistakable. In the background, just beyond the blurry shape of the parking lot, there was a black van parked near the exit, and standing beside it, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure, tall, cloaked in dark clothing, watching the pageant entrance. And in the foreground, standing directly under a flickering street lamp, was Ashley, alone, her tiny body framed by the harsh, unfeeling light. But she wasn't looking toward the door. She wasn't looking toward her mother. She was looking back into the darkness. And there, just behind her, someone was waiting. The photograph burned in Sarah's hands, the edges curling as if the image itself were trying to escape her gaze. The officer who had handed it to her lingered in the background. His voice hushed, but Sarah couldn't hear him. Her world had narrowed to the picture in front of her, the blurry outline of the van, the shadowy figure, and the unmistakable sight of Ashley, alone under the street lamp. That image was the last piece of tangible proof she had that her daughter had been taken. But as Sarah sat there, the photograph trembling in her hands, the overwhelming thought consumed her. Why hadn't Ashley run? Why hadn't she screamed for help? Her mind reeled, the pieces of the puzzle slipping and sliding just out of reach. The black van, the figure lurking in the shadows. None of it made sense. The officers had continued their search, moving through the building and the surrounding area, questioning anyone who might have seen something. But nothing had turned up. No one had heard a scream. No one had seen anything out of the ordinary. The entire building had been swept clean of clues. The police had to leave eventually, their search stalling at every turn. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something that had been right under their noses the whole time. It wasn't until days later that Sarah had a breakthrough. She was at home, standing in the kitchen, when the familiar scent of dust and old wood reached her nose. It was the attic that hadn't been touched in years, stale and used. It was filled with boxes of things Sarah had long since forgotten. Old family photos, her daughter's childhood drawings, and trinkets from before the pageant days. She'd been so caught up in Ashley's disappearance that she hadn't had time to go through it all. She hadn't even realized the attic held so many remnants of their life. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. A cereal bowl. It was a simple white bowl, just like the one Ashley had used that morning. The one her daughter had eaten her breakfast from before she disappeared. It was sitting there on a box of old clothes, next to a stack of worn-out books. But it was covered in mold. The once white porcelain was now a faded yellow, the remnants of spilled cereal long dried and forgotten. It seemed so out of place, so small compared to the enormity of the pain she was carrying. But something about it felt wrong. Something about it made Sarah's blood run cold. She didn't know why, but she picked it up. The moldy bowl felt heavy in her hands, as if it were holding something far more than just leftover food. Her fingers brushed the edges of the bowl, where a dried, crusted residue clung to the rim. She turned it slowly, inspecting it, but then her eyes stopped. There was something unusual about the bottom. There, etched into the porcelain, faint but clear as day, was a symbol, a swirl, like a spiral, carved with an unnerving precision. Sarah blinked, not understanding what she was seeing. Her mind screamed that it couldn't be what it looked like. But she knew it was. It was the same symbol she'd seen in the photograph. The symbol that had been etched on the side of the van in the background, so faint she hadn't noticed it until now. The symbol that had haunted her dreams since that first moment she laid eyes on it. Her breath caught in her throat. The moldy cereal bowl. It wasn't just a bowl. It was a clue. The nausea was instantaneous. Sarah felt her legs weaken, her head spinning. She set the bowl down on the attic floor, almost afraid to touch it again. But her fingers had already traced the pattern. She knew it. She recognized it now. The symbol was ancient. She had seen it before in the old stories her grandfather used to tell her. Stories of secret societies, cults that had lurked in the shadows for centuries, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The spiral was their mark, a sign of power, of control, of something far darker than Sarah could comprehend. It was too much to process. The connection between the cereal bowl and the van, the symbol that now haunted both. Her daughter's disappearance. It all connected in ways Sarah wasn't prepared for. With trembling hands, she took a deep breath and lifted the bowl again. There had to be more to it. There had to be something else she was missing. And then there it was. A small, crumpled piece of paper wedged inside the bowl, hidden beneath the thick layer of mold. Her heart skipped a beat as she gently pulled it out, the paper fragile, nearly disintegrating in her touch. It was a note. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. The child is ours. She will be the key. Sarah's blood ran cold. It felt like the air in the attic had frozen solid. The note was written by someone who knew Ashley, who knew exactly what had happened. But the words were cryptic, unsettling. The key? The child? What did it mean? Her mind raced, each piece of the puzzle slipping further into place, but it only made the nightmare more real. The words didn't belong to anyone Sarah recognized, but they might as well have been a death sentence for her daughter. As she stood there in the attic, the weight of the note pressing down on her chest, a new fear began to rise. She wasn't just looking for a missing child anymore. She was uncovering something far darker, something far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The note lay there on the floor, its crinkled edges still burning into Sarah's mind. The child is ours. She will be the key. The words echoed through her head, each repetition making her stomach churn. Whoever had written it knew something. They knew what had happened to Ashley, and they were waiting for something to unfold. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was close, but at the same time, the ground beneath her feet felt like it was slipping away. She wasn't just searching for her daughter anymore. She was piecing together something much darker, something that had been hidden in plain sight. She needed answers. Taking the note, Sarah stood up and carefully walked downstairs, her mind clouded with questions. She hadn't been able to see the bigger picture, and now that the note had surfaced, it felt like she was losing control of everything. She had to find out who was behind this, and why her daughter, of all children, had been chosen. But where would she even begin? The first thing Sarah did was search her old files. Over the past few days, she had accumulated folders filled with everything she had managed to find on Ashley's disappearance. Every police report, every statement from witnesses, every scrap of evidence. She sat down at the kitchen table, spreading everything out before her. The walls seemed to close in, the room too small, the air too thick. But it was one line in the first police report that caught her attention. It was an offhand remark made by one of the officers. Ashley had been followed. Sarah read the sentence again, her pulse quickening. She had skimmed past it the first time, too absorbed in her own grief and disbelief. But now, reading it slowly, the words felt like a key turning in a lock. The officer had meant it as a casual remark. Something about how one of the other pageant contestant parents had seen a man lingering near the parking lot. No one thought it was anything more than a coincidence. But what if it wasn't? What if someone had been following Ashley long before that night? Sarah's breath hitched in her chest as she sifted through the other pages of the file, seeking more details on the man. But there was nothing concrete, just vague descriptions, statements that didn't align with each other. But the officer's report about Ashley being followed didn't stop there. It also mentioned an encounter with someone who had attended multiple pageants in the area over the past few years. He was never formally identified, but his presence had been noted. Sarah knew she had to track down this man. He was the one consistent figure in the pages, the one clue that might lead her closer to the truth. The phone in her hand felt heavier than it ever had before. Her fingers hesitated before dialing the number of Detective Williams, the officer in charge of the case. The same detective who had told her not to worry, that they would find Ashley soon. It had been weeks now, and Sarah couldn't wait any longer. "Detective Williams," she said when the phone rang. Her voice was sharp, demanding. "Mrs. Thompson," he replied, his voice weary. "Any updates?" "I need you to pull the records from the pageant event," Sarah said, her voice tight. "I want to know everything about the man who was seen following Ashley. The one who was seen near the parking lot." There was a long pause on the line. "We're still looking into that, ma'am," Detective Williams replied, clearly uncomfortable. "But nothing concrete has come through yet. It's all just speculation." "I don't care about speculation anymore, Detective. I care about finding my daughter." Her voice trembled, but she kept her composure. "I know you're doing your job, but I need you to do more." There was another silence before Williams sighed. "All right, I'll have my team pull the records. We'll see what we can find." "Thank you," Sarah replied, hanging up the phone. With the phone call made, she turned back to the files spread across the table, but now her mind raced ahead. As she scanned the pages again, something in her gut told her she wasn't going to find the answers in the records. If Ashley had been followed, the truth was likely buried deeper. It wasn't just about who had taken her. It was about why. The cereal bowl, the note, the photograph. All of these pieces were scattered around her, pieces of a puzzle that didn't yet make sense. And the more Sarah looked at them, the more she realized that the picture they were painting wasn't something she was prepared for. As days passed, Sarah's obsession grew. She couldn't stop. She couldn't rest. She felt like she was being drawn into something dark, something far worse than she had imagined. Each connection she made, each new discovery felt like she was slipping deeper into a nightmare with no end in sight. But there was one thing she knew for sure. Someone had been watching Ashley. Someone had been pulling the strings for months, maybe even years. And that someone was waiting for the right moment to act. The spiral symbol on the cereal bowl wasn't just a mark, it was a message. A message that her daughter was the key. That was when Sarah made the decision to visit the pageant circuit herself, to track down anyone who might know the truth. It meant confronting everything she feared. The cult-like organization, the shadowy figures pulling the strings, and the horrifying possibility that Ashley had been part of something she didn't understand. But no matter what, Sarah had to find the truth. As Sarah prepared for her journey, she looked back at the files one last time. The symbol on the cereal bowl haunted her every thought. If she was going to find Ashley, if she was going to survive this, she needed to learn more about the forces that had taken her daughter. And in the deepest recesses of her mind, she knew that this wasn't just about Ashley anymore. This was about a conspiracy that had been hidden for decades, one that no one could ever have prepared for. Sarah had never expected to be sitting across from a stranger in the darkened corner of a small cafe, the pungent smell of cheap coffee lingering in the air. But here she was, trying to piece together the story of her daughter's disappearance, hoping to find anything that could lead her to the truth. She stared across the table at the man who had been watching her every move since she had contacted him. His name was John Harrow, and Sarah knew very little about him. He had been the one to respond to her inquiry about the mysterious man who had been seen near the pageant event. When she asked about him, Harrow had been eager to meet, too eager. He was a former pageant organizer, one of the many who had worked in the industry before he had retired from the scene. His disheveled appearance and haggard face suggested that his life had been far from easy, but his eyes, those dark, calculating eyes, made Sarah uneasy. "So, you're saying you knew something about the man who was following my daughter?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. She was struggling to keep her composure, every ounce of her being focused on this single thread of hope. Harrow leaned back, his hands clasped in front of him, as though he were weighing every word before speaking. "I didn't know him, but I saw him. A lot. He wasn't just hanging around one event, Sarah. He followed the pageants for years, moving from state to state, always lingering in the background, blending in like he belonged there." Sarah's breath caught. This man, this shadow, had been following Ashley before. That much was becoming clear. But it wasn't enough. She needed more, something that could confirm he was tied to her daughter's disappearance. Who was he? Sarah pressed. What was he doing there? Was he part of the staff? Was he a sponsor? How'd he fit in? Harrow's eyes flicked toward the door, as if expecting someone to walk in. He lowered his voice, speaking in barely a whisper, as though the very walls of the cafe might be listening. He wasn't part of the pageant staff, but he was always there. The girls, they didn't know him, not in any meaningful way. But the organizers, the ones behind the scenes, they knew him. They worked with him. They made deals with him. Made deals. Sarah repeated, her mind racing. What kind of deals? What could someone want from a child beauty pageant? Harrow's voice dropped even lower, his words barely audible. I can't say much, but I'll tell you this. He was involved with the investors. Those who run things behind the curtain. They don't just sponsor the pageants. They control the girls. They use them, trade them. And they've been doing it for years, under the guise of innocent competitions. There's a network, Sarah. It's not just one person. There's an entire system built around exploiting those children, all for profit. The horror of what Harrow was suggesting hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought she had prepared herself for this journey. But hearing the words, exploit, control, trade, made her stomach churn. Are you saying that Ashley was part of this? She whispered, afraid to even utter the thought. Harrow hesitated, his eyes darting to the side. I don't know if she was meant to be, but I do know this. She caught their attention. She had the right look, the right potential. They always keep track of the girls who could make it big, who could bring in the most money. You're not dealing with innocent people. Sarah, these men, they've been doing this for a long time, and they don't leave anything to chance. I think they've been watching Ashley for a while. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of Harrow's words suffocating. She had always known something was off, that the beauty pageant industry had a darker side, but she had never imagined it was this sinister. Her daughter had been caught in something far beyond the simple competition of smiles and glitz. So this man, he was just watching her, waiting for the right time. Sarah's voice wavered as she asked, her mind swirling with the implications of his answer. Harrow nodded slowly. Exactly. He watched them all, but Ashley was different. There was something about her that made her stand out. The way she moved, the way she interacted with the judges. She had the perfect combination of charm and beauty. They've been watching for years, Sarah. The second she won that pageant, they knew it was time. Time. The word echoed through Sarah's mind, louder than anything else. They had been waiting for Ashley, waiting for her to reach a certain age, a certain stage in her development, and then they would take her. The idea that her daughter had been nothing more than a commodity to these people. Her potential reduced to a profit margin sent waves of nausea through Sarah's body. So, who is he? She asked again, her voice shaking now. Who is this man, and what happened to my daughter? Harrow's gaze turned cold, and he leaned in closer. I'm telling you all I can, Sarah. I've already said more than I should, and it's a dangerous game. But if you want to find out what happened to your daughter, you need to find him. He's the one who knows everything. He's the key, and he's not alone. Who is he? Sarah pressed once more. Harrow paused, his eyes flicking toward the door again, then back to Sarah. He swallowed hard before speaking, his voice barely a murmur. His name is Julian Ferris. He's one of the investors. You won't find him easily, though. He's not someone you can just walk up to. He's a ghost in the system. But he's the one who orchestrated it all. He's the one who took Ashley. Sarah's blood turned to ice at the name. Julian Ferris. The name echoed in her mind, leaving a trail of dread behind it. She had heard whispers about him before. He was one of the richest men in the beauty industry, a shadowy figure who operated in the background, always hidden from the public eye. His wealth and influence reached far beyond what anyone in the public knew. But now, hearing his name linked to Ashley's disappearance, Sarah knew that finding him was the only way to uncover the truth. Sarah couldn't escape the image of Julian Ferris. His name burned in her thoughts like a brand searing the flesh. Every moment since Harrow's words had pierced through her consciousness, she had been running on autopilot, unable to process the full weight of the discovery. But one thing was clear now. Julian Ferris wasn't just some faceless figure in the beauty pageant circuit. He was a player in something much darker, a mastermind behind an underground network of exploitation. Harrow had told her everything he could, but she still didn't understand the full scope of Ferris's operations. Every question Sarah asked led to another. Every clue, Every answer seemed to open up a new world of terrifying possibilities, all centered around a man whose name she had just begun to know. It was time to take the next step. She had no other choice. The first thing Sarah did was visit the public records. She knew that Ferris was elusive, but there had to be something, an address, a connection, a shadow of his presence somewhere in the public sphere. She spent hours combing through documents, online databases, and any publicly available information she could dig up. And then, buried in the depths of a real estate ledger, she found it, a private estate located just outside of Denver. It was an unassuming property, a sprawling mansion hidden behind thick trees and high gates, far away from the prying eyes of the public. The name attached to the estate? Ferris Enterprises. Sarah's pulse quickened. She knew this was her only lead. She had to go to that mansion. But there was one problem. Ferris was no fool. If he was involved in this, he wouldn't just leave a trail for her to follow. There was something ominous about this address, and it felt like walking into the lion's den. But she had no choice. She had to see it for herself. The mansion wasn't far from where she was, just a 2-hour drive, but every minute that passed felt like an eternity. Sarah packed a bag with essentials, her phone, a notebook, a flashlight, just in case. She had to be ready for anything. When she arrived at the mansion, it was exactly as she had imagined it. Isolated, hidden from view, and surrounded by the dense forest that kept it locked away from the rest of the world. The grand iron gates were shut tight, and the mansion itself loomed behind the trees, dark and silent. But there were lights on the property. She could see them in the distance, flickering faintly from the windows. Sarah parked her car a few miles away and approached on foot, moving cautiously through the overgrown grounds, her heart pounding in her chest. The mansion was as imposing up close as it had seemed in the distance. The gates were locked, but there was a small service entrance on the side of the property, slightly ajar. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before slipping through. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust. The house was strangely quiet, the kind of silence that weighed down on you, making every step feel too loud. Sarah moved carefully through the halls, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath her feet. It was like stepping into another world, a world where the rules didn't apply, where the darkness had been allowed to grow unchecked. She ventured deeper into the mansion, following the faint glow of the lights until she reached the grand staircase. The walls were lined with expensive paintings, each one depicting idyllic scenes of wealth and power, of people who seemed untouchable. But Sarah's focus was elsewhere. She was searching for anything that could tie Julian Ferris to her daughter, anything that could explain why Ashley had been chosen. That was when she found it. In one of the rooms at the far end of the hall, she found a door partially open. Inside was a large office, filled with sleek furniture and expensive decor. But the most striking thing about the room was the wall. It was covered in photographs. Dozens of them, all pinned with meticulous care. Each photograph was of a different child. Some were older, some younger, but all of them were unmistakably part of the beauty pageant circuit. And there, in the center of it all, was a photo of Ashley. Her daughter's beaming face, so full of life, was framed in the center of the wall. The photo was taken at the pageant, just moments before her disappearance. She was smiling, holding her trophy in her small hands, her hair perfectly curled. But there was something off about the way she was positioned in the photo. Something unnatural. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. This wasn't just a photograph. It was part of a larger, twisted collection. Each child had their face circled with a red pen. The words written beneath each photo made Sarah's blood run cold. Subject. Potential. Key. The same words had been written on her daughter's photograph. Key. The word leapt off the page, its meaning sinking deep into Sarah's gut. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Ferris wasn't just exploiting the girls for their beauty. He was controlling them, watching them, cataloging them like merchandise in a sickening business plan. And Ashley had been chosen. She had been marked as the key. The key to what? Sarah wasn't sure. But it had to be something terrible, something unspeakable. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, sharp and rapid. Sarah froze, her pulse racing. The last thing she needed was to be caught. She quickly backed away from the wall, her eyes scanning the room for a place to hide. There was nowhere to go but into the shadows of the far corner. The door creaked open, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A man entered the room, his back to her. He was tall, wearing a suit that was too expensive to be anything but carefully curated. His hair was perfectly styled, and his eyes, hidden behind dark glasses, scanned the photographs on the wall. Sarah's blood ran cold. It was him. It was Julian Ferris. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as Julian Ferris stood in front of the photographs, his back to her. She was frozen in the shadows of the dark corner, barely breathing, praying that he wouldn't turn around. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to escape, but her feet were planted firmly to the floor. She had come too far to turn back now. Ferris didn't seem to sense her presence. He was absorbed in the photos, his fingers gently grazing the edges of each picture. The chilling part was how casual he seemed, as if he were admiring a collection of art, not human lives. Sarah felt a sickening chill crawl up her spine as she watched him. He had no idea that the very person whose life he had so carelessly cataloged was standing in this room, just inches away. For a long moment, Sarah's mind raced. What was she supposed to do now? She had come for answers for something, anything, that could tell her where Ashley was, what had happened to her. But in this moment, all she had was this man, this monster, and his carefully curated wall of victims. Her fingers clenched into fists as her thoughts turned darker. This wasn't just about Ashley anymore. This was about every child who had ever been used, controlled, and manipulated for his gain. And she wasn't going to let it happen again. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for something, anything that could help her. The desk was cluttered with papers, contracts, and expensive pens. But on the wall near the desk was a large map, pinned with strings connecting various locations, seemingly random, but each one labeled with a code. Her eyes widened as she realized what she was looking at. The map was a blueprint for something sinister. Ferris, still oblivious to her presence, continued to study the photos. "You've done well, my dear," he muttered to himself, as if addressing the picture of Ashley. "You are the one who will change everything." The words hit Sarah like a slap in the face. Change everything? What did he mean by that? What had Ashley gotten herself involved in? And why had Ferris said she was the one who would change everything? Sarah's mind was racing now. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there were still too many missing. What was this network? Why had Ferris been so interested in her daughter? What was the key? Her gaze fell to the desk. There, hidden beneath a pile of papers, was a small, dark box, sealed with a lock. The sight of it made Sarah's stomach churn. It was just small enough to be easily overlooked, but just big enough to hold something important. She had no idea what it was, but the sensation in her gut told her it was something significant, something that could change everything. Without thinking, Sarah moved closer to the desk. Every step felt like an eternity. Each breath she took louder than the last. She reached for the box, her hand trembling as she lifted it from the desk. The lock was old, but the box wasn't heavy. It was surprisingly light, almost too light. She ran her fingers over the surface, searching for any way to open it. The lock looked simple, but there was no key in sight. Her pulse raced. She needed to find the key, or she needed to find a way to open the box. This was the moment. She had to know what was inside. The faintest sound reached her ears, the click of Ferris's shoes on the floor as he moved toward the door. Sarah froze, barely able to control her breathing. She could hear the sound of the door handle turning. She had seconds, just seconds. Without thinking, she shoved the box in her bag and moved to the back of the room, retreating into the shadows just as Ferris turned around. He stepped closer to the desk, his hand brushing over the papers in front of him. He muttered something under his breath, but Sarah didn't hear the words. He turned toward the door again, and for a second, Sarah thought she was going to be caught. But Ferris didn't turn back. Instead, he opened the door and walked out, his footsteps echoing through the mansion as he left the room. Sarah stood still for a few moments, her heart racing in her chest. She waited until the sound of his footsteps had faded completely, until she was sure that she was alone again. Then, and only then, did she allow herself to exhale. She had the box, and she had to get out. The mansion seemed to close in around her as she slipped out of the room, back into the dim corridors. She kept her movements slow and steady, her mind still reeling from what she had seen. The walls seemed to shift with every step, and the doors she passed felt like they were watching her. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she made her way to the back entrance, the service door through which she had snuck in. She had to leave before Ferris returned, before anyone found out she had been there. Once she reached her car, Sarah felt the first true sense of relief. But as she drove away from the mansion, the weight of what she had learned crushed her once again. She hadn't been able to confront Ferris, and she hadn't found Ashley, but she had found something more important than she realized. The box, the locked box, and the key to everything lay inside. The journey from a mansion was long, but it felt like only moments passed before Sarah's eyes were fixated on the road ahead, her mind racing in 1,000 directions. The weight of the locked box burned a hole in her bag, its presence a constant reminder of the chilling secrets it contained. Every minute she drove felt like an eternity, the shadows of the forest around her pressing in as though the very earth were conspiring to keep her from the truth. The mansion, Ferris, the photographs, it was all too much. She had stepped into something far darker than she could have imagined. And now, the final piece of the puzzle was sitting in her lap, locked away in a small, insignificant-looking box. But she knew better than to underestimate its importance. This box could hold the answers she had been searching for since that horrible night. The moment she arrived home, Sarah locked the door behind her and tossed the keys onto the counter. She didn't want to waste any time. Her hands were shaking as she placed the box on the kitchen table. It sat there like a ticking bomb, silent but full of potential destruction. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed to know what was inside. The lock on the box was simple enough, but Sarah felt a strange sense of dread as she reached for the small tool she'd used to pry it open. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal, and with a click, the lock came free. She hesitated for a moment, her mind swirling with all the things that could be inside, a document, a photograph, a piece of jewelry, anything. But she had to know. She lifted the lid slowly, her breath held in anticipation. Inside, neatly wrapped in brown paper, was a folder. Sarah's heart pounded as she carefully pulled it out, her fingers trembling. The paper crinkled as she unfolded it, revealing a stack of documents. She glanced over the top sheet, her eyes scanning the contents. It was a dossier, a detailed report on Ashley. Her throat tightened. Every page was filled with information. Ashley's behavior at pageants, her potential as a future star, her grades, even personal details about Sarah and her ex-husband. It was all laid out meticulously. But that wasn't the most horrifying part. At the very back of the dossier, there was a single page with a handwritten note in bold, frantic writing. "She's ready." Sarah's stomach turned. Ready for what? She flipped through the remaining papers, each one more unsettling than the last. There were financial documents, wires from unknown sources, large sums of money moving between offshore accounts. Some of them were tied directly to Ferris Enterprises, but others were linked to shell companies Sarah had never heard of. She could feel the walls closing in around her as she tried to make sense of it all. The pieces weren't just falling into place. They were forming a horrifying image she couldn't yet comprehend. Her mind began to race as she turned the pages one by one. The last document in the folder was a list of names, dozens of them, followed by dates. The names were all girls, all associated with pageants in one form or another. Some were young, others older, but all had been marked with one word beside their names, potential. And then at the bottom of the page, there was Ashley's name, her date of birth, and beside it, one word, key. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. Sarah's breath quickened as she finally understood what the word meant. Key was not just a metaphorical term. It was the reason why her daughter had been chosen. She wasn't just another pretty face in a competition. She was a critical part of a much larger, much darker plan. But the question remained, what was the key? Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door startled Sarah. causing her heart to leap in her chest. Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world seemed to slow down. Who could it be at this hour? She glanced at the clock. Almost midnight. Sarah's pulse raced. Had Ferris found her? Had someone followed her? She had been so careful, but now the room felt smaller. She had to hide the documents. She had to hide everything before whoever was outside saw it. Another knock, louder this time, followed by a voice she didn't recognize. Sarah Thompson? We need to talk. Her body stiffened, the breath leaving her lungs. Her eyes darted to the back door, an escape route if necessary. She could run, but where could she go? How could she outrun the nightmare that was closing in around her? Sarah, we know you're in there, the voice continued. Open up. This is important. Sarah's mind raced as she turned back to the table, her fingers trembling as she quickly shoved the folder back into the box and slammed the lid shut. She didn't have time to think. She had to act fast. The knock came again, louder this time, almost as if the person on the other side was losing patience. With shaky hands, Sarah moved toward the window, peering through the blinds. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the black SUV parked outside. It was a car she recognized, the same type that had followed her when she was at Ferris's mansion. She couldn't wait any longer. There was no time for hesitation. Sarah grabbed the box, rushed through the back door, and ran into the night, her breath ragged in her chest. The cold air stung her skin as she sprinted down the alley behind her house, the distant sound of car doors slamming behind her. Whoever these people were, they knew too much. They had been watching her for far too long. And now, it was clear, Sarah was no longer just a mother searching for her daughter. She was tangled in a web of conspiracy, danger, and terror that went far beyond her imagination. But no matter the cost, she would get to the truth. She had no choice. Sarah's lungs burned as she sprinted through the darkened alleyway, her feet pounding against the cold concrete. The air was thick with the chill of the night, but it did little to dull the heat building inside her chest. The fear, the adrenaline, the overwhelming sense that the walls were closing in around her. She couldn't stop now. Not after everything she had uncovered. Not after the horrifying truth that had begun to surface. Her daughter was more than a pawn in a twisted game. She was the key, the central piece in something so much larger and darker than Sarah had ever imagined. The black SUV was still parked in front of her house, the lights of its headlights cutting through the darkness like a spotlight. Sarah's breath was shallow, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had to get away. She couldn't face them, not yet, not without knowing more. She couldn't let them have her. Her heart raced as she turned down another street, zigzagging through the narrow roads behind the houses, hoping the shadows would conceal her long enough to gain some distance. She had no destination, only a need to get away. The documents, the box, the horrifying truth about the child beauty pageant network that had ensnared her daughter, it all weighed heavily on her mind. She reached an abandoned warehouse. The lights were off, the building's exterior crumbling, but it was a hiding place. It was a chance. Without a second thought, Sarah darted toward the warehouse, her legs aching with every step. She could hear the SUV's engine now, its growl just behind her. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep running. But as she reached the entrance to the warehouse, a figure stepped out from the shadows in front of her. It was Julian Ferris. Going somewhere, Sarah? His voice was smooth, calm, as if they were merely having a conversation on a pleasant afternoon. But the danger in his eyes was undeniable. Sarah froze, her hand tightening around the bag in her grip. "Where's my daughter?" Sarah demanded, her voice cracking with desperation. Ferris's lips curled into a faint, mocking smile. "You still don't understand, do you? Your daughter isn't lost, Sarah. She's part of something much bigger than you could ever comprehend." His words sent a cold chill running through her, and she clenched her teeth, fighting to control the surge of anger that flooded her chest. "The key," he said softly, his voice dripping with malice. "Ashley is the key to everything we've built. She's the one who will open the doors, unlock the future." His words were like poison, each syllable sinking deeper into Sarah's consciousness. "The key to what?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fury. "What are you talking about?" Ferris's eyes gleamed with cold amusement as he took another step forward. To the future of a new world order, of course. A world where beauty isn't just skin deep, where perfection is manufactured. Ashley, your daughter, was always meant to be the one to change everything. No, Sarah whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. You're insane. Ferris's smile didn't falter. Insane? Maybe. But when you control the right people, the right systems, insanity becomes a matter of perspective. Before Sarah could react, the sound of another car pulling up behind her made her turn quickly. More figures emerged from the shadows, 2 men in black suits, each holding a set of keys in their hands. The SUV had parked beside her, and they were closing in. She had no time left. Without thinking, Sarah lunged at Ferris, her hands shaking but determined. She swung the bag hard, aiming for his face. But he was quicker. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully, sending the bag flying from her hands. It skidded across the cracked pavement. Don't fight it, Sarah, Ferris said, his grip tightening as he forced her back. You can't win. This is already over. Sarah's chest tightened with panic, but she refused to give up. Ashley, she had to get to her daughter. She had to finish this, no matter what it took. With all the strength she could muster, she pulled her knee up sharply, hitting Ferris in the stomach. He staggered back, his grip loosening just enough for Sarah to break free. She stumbled toward the bag, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel Ferris's eyes on her, but she couldn't stop. She had come too far. She grabbed the bag, yanking it open. The box was still inside, but as Sarah turned to face Ferris, she realized something. The man who had once seemed so untouchable, so cold, was now on the ground, staring up at her with an expression of pure rage. But the darkness in his eyes only fueled Sarah's determination. He was not going to win. I'm going to destroy everything you've built, Ferris, Sarah said, her voice sharp with defiance. And it starts with you. Sarah's hands were trembling, the box heavy in her grip as she stared down at the men surrounding her. The distant hum of the SUV's engine seemed to grow louder with every passing second. The entire night felt like one long, twisted nightmare, but Sarah was no longer afraid. Her mind was sharp, her focus clear. She had come too far to stop now, and she had one mission: to expose the truth. Ferris, lying on the ground, looked up at her with narrowed eyes, still seething with fury. His expensive suit was crumpled, his usually composed demeanor shattered. But Sarah wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. He had underestimated her. And now, the tables had turned. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, Sarah. Ferris spat, his voice low and venomous. You think you're going to change anything? You think you can take down everything I've built? His eyes gleamed with cold malice. You're nothing but a small piece in a much bigger game. You'll never make it out alive. Sarah didn't flinch. You're wrong, she said, her voice firm, unwavering. It's already over for you. Your network, your empire, it's coming down. She glanced around, making sure the men were closing in, the danger still very real. But she knew one thing. They weren't prepared for this. She opened the box slowly, deliberately. The contents were still inside, the documents, the notes, the proof she had gathered, every piece of the twisted puzzle that Ferris had been hiding for years. The information wasn't just about Ashley. It was about everyone involved, every child, every family who had been swept into Ferris's system of manipulation. The 2 men in suits were moving toward her now, but Sarah took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage she had left. She wasn't just going to walk away from this. She had already lost so much, but she wouldn't lose herself. Not now. Not when the truth was within reach. Ferris's smile curled into something darker, more dangerous. You think you're going to bring me down? With what? That box? Those papers? Do you really believe anyone will listen to you? You'll be silenced, just like the others. You'll be forgotten. But Sarah had already anticipated this. She reached into the box and pulled out the flash drive, the one hidden beneath the stack of papers. The one that Ferris thought was inconsequential, but that she had taken from his mansion. It was the key. It was the real evidence. I don't think you understand, Sarah said, her voice unwavering. This, she held up the flash drive, this is what will destroy you. You can't hide behind money or power when the truth comes for you. She held it out in front of her, her hand steady despite the fear swirling inside her. Ferris's eyes flickered for a moment, just a flicker of hesitation. It was the smallest crack in his armor, but it was enough for Sarah to see. With a quick motion, she shoved the flash drive into her pocket, not trusting her hands to do anything else. She didn't need to show him anymore. The game was over. He had played his hand, and now it was her turn. The men in suits stopped advancing, realizing she wasn't the scared woman they thought she was. Sarah stood tall, the box now sealed again, but the knowledge inside it was her weapon. The moment she had been waiting for was here, and she wasn't going to let slip away. You think you're going to win? One of the men sneered. You have no idea what's coming. I already know, Sarah said, her voice low, filled with the conviction that had built over the past few days. The truth is already out there. People are already listening. And Ferris, your empire is crumbling. The people you've controlled, the families you've exploited, they're waking up. They're going to fight back. A silence settled over the group as Sarah held her ground. Ferris's fury was palpable, but for the first time, he was powerless. He couldn't stop what had already begun. You'll regret this, Ferris growled. No, Sarah replied, stepping back, slowly and deliberately. You will. She turned, looking over her shoulder one last time, making sure they were watching. This wasn't over. The world was about to change, and it was her doing. With one last glance, Sarah walked away from the warehouse, her heart still pounding but filled with the weight of the truth. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be battles, there would be dangers. But she had done it. She had uncovered the dark web that Ferris had built. And now, she would make sure it all came crashing down. As Sarah disappeared into the night, she didn't look back. The box, the papers, the evidence, they were safe. She had won. For Ashley, for all the children who had been used, for the truth itself. It was time to tear down the walls Ferris had built, and she would see it through to the end.